Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A pleasure to have you here with us today. Maybe we could just begin with a brief introduction to the series Dangerous Liaisons. I guess some people will be familiar with the story, some won't be. What can audiences expect from this incarnation?
Well, season 1 is very much honours the novel. We go to a world of seduction and scheming and wit and humour, but the show is really through the eyes of our wonderful couple, Valmont and Camille, and it's the story of their love. But
it's a love story.
It is a love story, but it's their rise as well from these kind of humble beginnings in a way to ascend the heights of Paris nobility, but they're really both driven to right the wrongs done to them in their past. But it's how that desire for kind of revenge and atonement sort of corrupts them. So that is the overview of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your way into this? I mean, I was a big fan of the 80s film,
Yeah.
Loved Cruel Intentions. It was a completely different take on that again.
Yeah.
Or did you return to the source material and start afresh with this one?
Very much to the source, and when Colin asked me to look at it, obviously thrilled and longing to work with Colin, but to look at the novel and think, what else can it give us? Because as you say, those multiple brilliant adaptations. But it was going through the novel and finding this one particular letter written by the Marquise, which talks of her reinvention and the way she has really constructed herself to survive and navigate this world of the Ancien Regime in France. That made me think, my interpretation of that was, she wasn't from that world. And that was the beginning, thinking, well, if she wasn't from that world, where did she come from? And why is this such a battle? What has brought her here? And that gave me the idea of this landscape of the past, and the same for Valmont, what drives this kind of narcissistic, destructive behaviour. I wanted to really understand them, and I said to Colin, maybe what this should be is a prelude, that we take them to the landscape of morality that we find in those characters of the novel and the movie, but we don't start them there. This is innocence to experience to corruption. So that was really the way in.
But it was Harriet's brilliance in finding that clue buried in that letter that opened the door and told us, explain how we could tell a story and what the story could be.
And coming to your absolutely phenomenal cast, in just very kind of varied, some familiar faces, some less familiar faces, from Alison Nicholas right at the centre of it, like Leslie Manville, as you've never seen her before.
As you've never seen her. Very bold.
Paloma Faith. So talk us through how you put these people together and how you work with them to achieve your vision.
Well, our first step was to cast the two central roles, the two lovers. And we spread a net very wide, and we had a lot of auditions come in. And the moment we saw Alice's audition and the moment we saw Nicholas' audition, we said, okay, we can stop, we got them.
Yeah.
And then we wanted to get them together because we were auditioning during COVID, so we couldn't do stuff in person. And we decided to try and bring them together. And then you can explain what we did.
Yeah, which was extraordinary because they were auditioning together but behind Perspex screens or on Zoom, like working with each other. And yet this incredible chemistry just transcended all those constraints. And I remember afterwards we just said to each other, wow, if that's what they can do in this situation, can you imagine when we can get them together on screen? And that really feels like it is coming through for everyone, because it certainly did for us.
And once we had them, once we had our central, cast, then we had the great fun of casting all the other characters, and we had a lot of fun doing it with actors and actresses playing roles that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to do.
Yeah, and Paloma really has the theme tune in a really weird way in her arsenal for the show, because Only Love Can Hurt Like That, which I think is just perfect for our characters. But she was wonderful.
Did you have to do any convincing with Leslie, or was she
No,
just like
actually,
that?
no. She responded to Harriet's words on the page.
Yeah.
And we wanted an actress who would cast a sort of shadow over the whole series. So we wanted somebody with real gravitas and substance. And so she was wonderful.
Talk us through a bit about this incredible aesthetic, really, immerse us in the 18th century, the incredible costumes, because I know it's not an easy thing to do, and you've really gone for it.
Yeah.
So, you know, where did you start with the aesthetic, and how did you manage to build it into what we see
Well, it
on
wasn't
screen?
just the costumes, the
Well,
wigs were also.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this really speaks to the support of stars as it was then, but to fund this in the way it needed to, so that, you know, the movie was a work of art, but every scene in this show has that level to have that support to enable us to get the very best in each of those heads of department and build the world, because the world of Paris that we're wanting to go to doesn't exist anymore. All of that has gone sort of, you know, because of the revolution. So nobody can find that Paris in Paris, but we found it in Prague and had the most incredible production designer, David Roger, who really knows this world almost better than anyone alive. I think it is in his blood. So together with, I mean, I know this period hugely well and love it, and our, you know, historical advisors, but David's vision for the show, Andrea's with the costumes. I mean, it was just a wonderful synergy, wasn't it?
but it's also about using the materials and objects of the time. So the clothes are made with, you know, materials that were worn at the time. The curtains, the rugs, it's all about the detail. I mean, making a television series or even a movie is about accumulation of tiny details, getting them right. And so it's that attention to detail in the design of the show that I think really makes you feel as though you're there and it's real.
Was there any moment on set that was particularly challenging? I mean, I don't even know how many hours of makeup and getting people into these dresses it took, but was there any hiccups along the way?
I think that's a huge part of it, though, the prep time, you know, because it influences then what can be shot in the day and who you can work with.
Well, tell the story about how Alice felt about wearing the corsets.
So it's really interesting. Alice really, and I think a lot of our female actors, but she particularly felt the constraint and burden of those costumes, but in a way that by the end, because her burden in this show is huge. There's virtually no scene that is without Camille. So the endurance and our admiration for her are so huge. But by the end, she felt oppressed within the costumes in exactly, I think, the way that clothes were used in a way to constrain and restrain women in the past. You can't run, you can't breathe properly, you're weakened by what you're wearing, and it was really interesting. She really started to kind of feel that inhabiting her, which was quite fascinating.
And just finally, you know, obviously period dramas like this, on the one hand, it's just great to escape our normal world for a while and be lost in the story. But there's definitely a feminist reimagining here, and there are themes that come out of it, and how women had to find different ways to control and manipulate power, and we can look at that and also see how maybe it was ahead of its time, the novel itself. So what do you think the takeaways are?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, Laclos was a great feminist. I mean, that's what's so extraordinary, and even with Valmont in the novel, Matoy does drive it so hugely, but I think definitely coming to it as a feminist, to look at being able to power the show with Camille and a character who's unapologetic and flawed and damaged and not our traditional female lead was really, really exciting. And then to look at the character of Valmont, who I thought would be my biggest challenge in a way. How do I love this man? But I think I wanted to really see where his damage had come from, because you don't just end up as a narcissistic sort of destroyer of women for no reason. And that was wonderful to look at masculinity as well in a way that didn't judge it in certain ways, but tried to understand it. But I think there is hopefully real resonance for today.
Yeah, I mean, we lent into that because we think that is today, it's something that young women today who see the show will relate to in certain ways.
Absolutely. I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Can't wait for everyone else to watch
Thank you
Dangerous
so
Liaisons.
much.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Lovely to
Thank
chat
you.
to you.
So
Thank you.
lovely. Thank you.